This is the 70th anniversary presentation of the fire of 1947. My name is Stephen Spofford, and I am the current Kennebunk town historian, and have done this presentation several times for the Brickstore Museum. And we are doing this so that it will be online for people to continue to understand this disastrous event from back in 1947. In October of 1947, from October the 19th to October the 29th, fires were burning all over the state of Maine. In 1979, previous Kennebunk town historian Joyce Butler wrote her book, which is still the comprehensive history of the 1947 fires, called Wildfire Loose, The Week That Maine Burned. Her research and the book is considered the complete history of the 1947 fire. This talk was originally done by her to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the fire, and she has helped me, and I expound my thanks to her for her help with me coordinating this talk for the 70th anniversary. Joyce Butler's work brought together the hard facts that were contained in the reports from different agencies on the fire, along with news accounts, and she put this together with personal interviews that she had conducted with over 45 people who lived through or fought the fires. Their stories were intermixed with other information that she had found in those reports and in the newspaper accounts to truly humanize the 1947 fire experience. In my own case, my personal history with my family that lived in the Kennebunks and Biddeford area prompted myself to continue my own research into my own family's experiences during the 1947 fire. When I first gave this talk in October of 2017, the fires were burning in California near Santa Rosa and in the Napa wine country. It was very current and understandable that what was happening in California at that time was very, very similar to what had gone on here in southern Maine in 1947. And it was definitely in everyone's mind because it was nightly on the national news broadcast. This is a map of York County and southern Oxford County, which shows where the fires burned in October of 1947. At the top is the fire which was called the Fryeburg Brownfield Fire. It included the towns of Fryeburg, Brownfield, Hiram, Porter, and Denmark, with a total of 20,120 acres burned. The middle section of fire shown was the largest fire that burnt in York County. It included the communities of Shapley, Newfield, Limerick, Waterboro, Lyman, Parsonsfield, Alfred, Hollis, Kennebunk, Wells, Saco, and Dayton. 109,110 acres in total burnt. The third, smaller fire that is shown close to the coast and to the ocean was the North Kennebunk Port Fire, now the town of Arundel, which includes the communities of Arundel, Kennebunk Port, and coastal Biddeford, burning in total 21,910 acres. Coinciding in the same period of October 1947 was the fire up in Hancock County on Mount Desert Island. The Mount Desert Island fire burnt into the communities of Bar Harbor, Seal Cove, and Southwest Harbor. It included much of what is now Arcadia National Park. In total, 17,188 acres of Mount Desert Island were burnt. Other fires were burning in other parts of the state during this same week, in the communities of Durham, Livermore Falls, Brunswick, Richmond, Machias, Jonesboro, Carmel, Anson, Madison, and Norridgewock, for a total of 28,068 acres burnt. This brought a total of 196,391 acres that were burned in total in the state of Maine in October of 1947. What caused these fires? What made them to be as catastrophic as they were? It had been an extremely dry summer. There had been no considerable rain had fallen since May of 1947. It had been a beautiful summer, but there is much dry land. The forests were tinder dry, as were fields, and it had been a long period of time since about before the World War II, that there were many downed trees from hurricanes that had come through the area. This helped to make the forest more dangerous. This is a photo of Ted Dyer, the Associated Press photographer at the time for Southern Maine. His photos graced many newspapers in the area, including the Portland Press Herald, the Biddeford Saco Journal, the York County Star, the Sanford News, etc. He embedded himself with the firefighters in the 3 southern fires, particularly the ones burning through Waterboro and Kennebunk Port. His photos that he took at great danger to himself are what we have in our collections here at the Brickstorm Museum and are really the photographic record of the fire back in 1947. Again, to great personal danger to himself, his photos that we will be seeing in this presentation are amazing. He burnt through 3 pairs of boots while he was doing his photography. So we will begin to explain the chronological beginnings of these fires that burnt from October 19th through October 26th of 1947. On Sunday, the 19th of October, 50 forest fires were burning in Maine. Significantly, many of the worst had proven difficult to be put out and had flared up again and again. There had already been losses of homes as well as forests. The public was finally made aware of the dangerous conditions. Governor Hildreth in Augusta declared the upcoming hunting season closed for fear of the fire danger that would be present if the hunters went out into the woods. A minister in West Falmouth, Maine, held a special prayer meeting to pray for a miracle for rain to come, saying miracles happen if it is the will of God. By Monday, the 20th of October, the fire that had been mulling along in North Kennebunk Port, now Arundel, underground, beside Route 1, finally flared up. This is a Ted Dyer photo of that flare-up along Route 1 north, going towards Kennebunk into Biddeford, approximately at the site today of the new Cape Arundel Cottage complex along Route 1. Firefighters, as you can see, were standing, looking along Route 1 as the arc of flames jumped over their heads and jumped Route 1. It burned onto the next side of the road to Route 1A, where it jumped that route too, and was now headed toward the outlying areas of the city of Biddeford and in the eastern part of Kennebunk Port. By the end of this day, families had been evacuated on Biddeford's West Street and Guinea Road, and the fire was headed towards the coastal community of Fortunes Rocks and coastal Biddeford, and directly into Kennebunk Port's Goose Rocks Beach community. By that evening, and early into Tuesday, October 21st, the fire swept into the coastal community in Kennebunk Port of Goose Rocks Beach. It burned 100 houses at the eastern end, burned directly to the sea. If people had not left by Monday evening to find shelter somewhere else, they were driven from their homes onto the beach, and eventually it was necessary for them to get into the ocean. They looked towards Timber Island, which sits just offshore on the eastern end of Goose Rocks Beach, as perhaps a refuge for them, but watched as the wind carried burning material and embers into the trees there, and Timber Island itself caught on fire. This brings me to a personal piece of family history. This is the home of my great-aunt, Olive Emmons, that was located on the eastern end of Goose Rocks Beach, bordering Beaver Dam Brook and the Little River. It had been built by her husband, Ivory Emmons, when they were first married in 1898. It had been her home for her whole married life. Ivory had passed away. She had heard about the fires that were coming down from Route 1, but had not been too concerned about them. However, neighbors had tried to convince her that she should perhaps pack up and leave. My paternal grandfather, Franklin Spofford, lived just across Little River at Granite Point. He came with his car and asked Aunt Olive to leave. It was necessary for her to go. The fire was headed right her way. So she decided that this is what she should do. She took only a suitcase full of some clothing, guest books that she had that had people's and acquaintances and families' addresses, her Holy Bible, and her collection of glass animals that she so cherished, and left. It is a very good thing that she left that Monday evening, because by Tuesday noontime, this is what was left of the eastern end of Goose Rocks Beach. If you look at the top of the photograph towards the middle, you will see where there is a hotel called the Homestead, which building was still located. Just directly to the right of that is the foundation hold of Olive Emmons' home. Most of the cottages and houses on the east end of the beach were completely destroyed. Only a few in this more close-up of the same photograph taken by airplane 2 days after the fire went through. You can see that there are a couple cottages that did survive. It is because people did stay with them and they were able to succeed. Another front of this fire moved towards Route 9 and headed towards the community in Kennebunkport of Cape Porpoise, where it split and went in two directions around the village, burning and destroying property and houses that were on the outskirts of the main village of Cape Porpoise. 82 houses burned in that part of Kennebunkport. At the end of that day, the Kennebunkport fire was being called the worst in the history of the Maine Fire Service. It was still not out. As this fire was ripping through the community of Kennebunkport, fires were starting in the middle part of York County, in the community of Shapley, and it came over into Waterboro. This is a picture of that fire soon after it began. It went over Ossipee Hill in Waterboro and drove the fire watchman, who had been reporting on it for 5 days, fires in York County, from his post. Along with him, firefighters had to race down through the flames to safety. The fire then moved into Waterboro's village centers. This is a farmhouse in North Waterboro. You can see that there is smoke, that the fire is approaching, and that they had tried with the tractor to put a fire line around the buildings. However, they were not successful, and the farmhouse was destroyed by fire. This is the community of East Waterboro, where the fire was driving towards that community. People were asked to leave immediately. This is along currently Route 5 in East Waterboro, and you will know that most of these houses, including the one where the truck is in front of, where they are removing furniture from, did survive the fire of 1947. However, the people did evacuate, and quickly, because they were unsure. A fire was also burning up on Mount Desert Island, and this is a photo of just about where this fire began in a cranberry bog. By the 22nd, this fire had become uncontrolled and was burning unchecked. It swept towards Arcadia National Park and Bar Harbor's town center, where it burned 19th century mansions on what Life magazine had dubbed Millionaire's Row. All the access roads out of Bar Harbor were cut off. The famous Jackson Laboratory of Bar Harbor, which is in still existence today, was completely destroyed in October of 1947. Precious records of research and thousands of specially bred mice that we used to study disease were completely destroyed. The fire came close, but was stopped before it completely destroyed the entire village center of Bar Harbor, Maine. Because the access roads out of Bar Harbor that would have taken people to safety off of the island were cut off, 2,500 people were actually stranded in the village center and eventually on the town's pier. 400 were evacuated by water, by any vessel that could come across Frenchman's Bay. 400 people were evacuated this way before the fire stopped by the firefighters just before it reached the village outskirts, and then people were able to be evacuated by land. As the fire was burning in Mount Desert Island, by Thursday the 23rd, two fires back in southern and western Maine that had been burning basically under control finally went under completely unchecked status. This is called Red Thursday, the day of the great wind. Winds all over Maine went to over 40 miles per hour. A fire that had been burning in the community of Freiburg swept unchecked into the town of Brownfield, which lost 75% of its taxable property, including every public building, the town hall, church, library, homes. That fire was completely not stopped, and it moved further south through the town of Hiram and Porter. The Ossipee Hill fire that swept down Ossipee Hill into the Waterboroughs took 25 cottages onto Little Ossipee Pond, and then moved into the community of South Waterboro, destroying 2/3 of that community, and 3/4 of the community of East Waterboro. It then swept into the community of Lyman, Maine, destroying 192 buildings and 100 summer camps. This is Jackson's Corner Store, or what's left of it, along Route 35 and Route 111 in Lyman. This whole section of Lyman was burnt right through and was completely destroyed. However, the village of Goodwin's Mills along the border of the towns of Lyman and Dayton had been saved by a fire break that had been created with bulldozers from the Maine Turnpike project and had been brought up from Kennebunk. It was completely saved. However, embers did fall on buildings, but there was enough people to be able to control them and put them out. On this same day, a fire that had been threatening in the community of Newfield finally blew up and burned 60 home and public buildings, stores, and a sawmill. This is a photograph of firefighters on Poole Street in Biddeford. Biddeford, by this point on the 23rd, was almost encircled by fire and flames. A section of the fire that had been burning through Lyman came and threatened on the western side of Biddeford the two hospitals, the Weber Hospital and Trull, and there was concern that if it got into that section of the city, it would then go into the city center, and then perhaps would jump the Saco River and move into the city of Saco, and thusly into Old Orchard Beach. Firefighters were pulled from all fronts to stop the flames, and this occurred in a valley below a hill where the current Biddeford Crossing Shopping Center is located, where Target, Longhorn Steakhouse, Panera Bread, and the Market Basket supermarket are located today. They were able to force the fire to go along that ridge and head back towards Fortune's Rocks. This is the group of force of men gathered to start to defend that area of coastal Biddeford. They were successful from keeping the fire from the Biddeford Pool center. However, it swept into the coastal community on the western side, which was the coastal community of Fortune's Rocks, leaving only 6 houses in the total that were there in that village, standing on the western side. This is the coastal community of the village of Fortune's Rocks the day after the fire went through on Friday the 24th. The white building in the middle is the house of John Kerr. It was located, and still is located there, at the intersection of Old Kings Highway and Fortune's Rocks Road, with the Horseshoe Cove Bay in front of it, and directly behind it, the freshwater Etherington Pond. Mr. Kerr was able to save his house with water from the pond. He completely doused it on all sides until the fire came through and raced over his head. When it did, he jumped into Etherington Pond himself and saved his life. But he had very fortunately wet his house down enough that just minor burning and holes in the roof, it was saved. This brings me to another piece of family personal history. This is the summer home of my grandparents, Franklin and Juanita Spofford, that was located at 63 Granite Point Road in Biddeford. Granite Point is just to the west, on the other side of Horseshoe Cove, from the Fortune's Rocks Village Center. My grandparents stayed with their home. They had started to stay through the fall and close up before Thanksgiving in November was their plan, because the weather had been so nice. They had brought my grandmother's aunt, Olive Emmons, here from her home on Monday evening, so she was there with them. However, the fire had come to them by Thursday the 23rd, and by noontime that day it had become so fierce that they decided that they needed to they had no attempt to leave, they could no longer leave by the head of Granite Point Road, that they needed to save their own property. So my grandfather put out all of my grandmother's wash basins and filled them with salt water and put them all around the base of the house. My grandmother, with a broom and rake, would put out any of the embers that came along the foundations of the house. My grandfather got up on the roof with a ladder and did the same along the roof. My grandmother recalled in her interview with Joyce Butler that the only contact that she and my grandfather had was through yelling at each other, because it got so dark and black and smoky that they could not see a foot in front of them. However, they were able to see the bright orange embers as they would come down, either along the foundation or the roof line. And as the fire went through, they spent approximately 8 hours trying to keep their house from burning. They accomplished this, including the small garage that you see at the back of the house. The house on the island, which was across the marsh from them, closer to Little River, was destroyed by the flames. This photo was taken in 1936. This is a picture of the schoolhouse in Dayton, Maine. By the 24th, the fire had gone into lower alignment into Dayton and threatened the southern sector of that community. Dayton was swept by flames, and it lost its town hall, its school, 29 houses, and 27 barns. It then did jump the Saco River into North Saco, but it was stopped there after it jumped by firefighters, and not a house was lost. Another branch of the Lyman fire had gone into the community of Kennebunk, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. On Sunday the 29th, most of the fires were under control. Only in Township 19 in Washington County was there one fire that was not. By the 29th, on Wednesday, there was finally rain. 0.25 of an inch of rain fell in York County. And this is the fire chief of Windham that had come down to assist with the fires in the southern part of the state. And this was his reaction to seeing rain. Governor Hildreth in Augusta, when he told that it was raining in York County, said, "Thank God." Real rain did not fall until November the 8th. But let's get back to the fire that started burning on the 24th of October into Saturday the 25th in the area of Kennebunk called the Alewife section. These are firefighters and students from Kennebunk High School fighting the fire along the woods in the Alewife section of Kennebunk. Kennebunk firefighters along the fire area in Alewife. Currently, where Russell Acres Farm is and Russell Acres Road in Alewife is where the Kennebunk Fire Department made a fire line that went from Russell Acres Farm all the way across to Cole Road in West Kennebunk. They did this again with a bulldozer from the Maine Turnpike. They dragged right through the woods and through fields to make the fire line there, and they were able to accomplish with several hundred men stopping the fire here. Firefighters, volunteers, and National Guardsmen. The museum was founded by Edith Barry in 1936. Miss Barry was an artist in her own right. This is her depiction of the fire scene in downtown Kennebunk, along where Summer Street enters onto Route 1. Ahead of you is the Unitarian Church. Miss Barry did take some artistic license with showing the flames that were behind the Unitarian Church along the tree line of Hope Cemetery. A little bit artistic license there. The fire was in that area up north of this location, burning in the Alewife. However, it was not as close to the center of the community as she depicted. However, the sky definitely would have been that color in the nighttime when the fire was burning up in Alewife. She does depict well. The Unitarian Church was used as a refugee site for families that had been displaced from their homes during the fires, particularly for those of Arundel and Kennebunk Port. It also was a place for feeding firefighters and the National Guard, which was being barracked across the street in Kennebunk Town Hall. And you can see the people coming up from Kennebunk Port with all of their possessions, headed for safety. Miss Barry also was very, very apt with her movie camera. And these are stills from her movie camera that she took from approximately the corner of Maine and Dane Street, right by the Brickstore Museum. It shows on the upper left-hand corner some exhausted firefighters sleeping on the Kennebunk Free Library lawn. Next to it is on Fletcher Street, right at the intersection with Route 1, Main Street. 2 trucks with tanks in the back of them that were being filled with water from the hydrant that was just across the street that you'll see just in the picture below on the right at the corner of Maine and Dane with the hydrant wrench on it. The water district was allowing people to fill up at that hydrant. And the National Guardsmen right there at the intersection of Fletcher and Maine. The fire station was located just down Fletcher Street in what is now currently the back parking lot of Kennebunk Savings Bank. And that was the fire headquarters for all the fires burning in York County. And people and volunteers and firefighters were sent from that location to what fire that they were needed to go and fight. These are shots from Ted Dyer's photography that show the fire burning up in Waterboro, destroying a home. Fire burning along the road up in Alfred and Waterboro. Firefighters gathering up in Alewife in Kennebunk, preparing to fight off and take a stand against the fire coming down into that section of Kennebunk from Lyman. Destruction at Goose Rocks Beach, 2 days after the fire went through and destroyed most of the eastern end of that community. Fire going over a ridge in Arcadia National Park on Mount Desert Island. Again, the remains of homes in the summer community of Goose Rocks Beach, with National Guardsmen on guard duty because of the looting of copper piping that was located in these cottages. This is a picture of a family home in the community of Dayton. The father of this family had been in World War I and was very proud of the fact of flying the American flag in their yard. Before the family had to leave because flames were headed their way, they took down the flag and left. This was the day after the fire. They returned and put the flag on the burnt flagpole with just the chimney of the home remaining. This family did rebuild their home on the same site. And this is a picture from Miss Barry's movies after the fire of her traveling around the community of a home up in the Alewife section of Kennebunk that had been destroyed, and homes destroyed in Booth Bay Harbor. More homes, Bar Harbor. A lost home in Waterboro. And a lost cow barn in Dayton. This is a photo of firefighters and policemen receiving supplies of coffee and sandwiches up in the Alewife section of Kennebunk. This was done all throughout all the fire areas. Women would be, of the area, would be gathered at places like the Unitarian Church in Kennebunk, the Community House in Kennebunkport, in the city of Biddeford in different locations, making tons of coffee and getting up sandwiches with no kind of mayonnaise or mustard on them, but ham, bologna, and peanut butter and jelly. A picture from one of the different locations, this one being a fire refugee site in Saco. This is the Red Cross headquarters in the city of Portland. The call was made out that anybody who had shovels, rakes, brooms, any kind of hose, any kind, buckets, that they were to be brought to the Red Cross where they were distributed to the area fire, and this was the result. This got higher than the windows by the time it was done. Joyce Butler was a young lady in Portland at this point in time, and she remembers going and taking her family's shovels and brooms, etc., to this location. Firefighters from the town of Kennebunk after the fire was out in Alewife. This is the pump from the Felcher's Neck Coast Guard Station at Biddeford Pool that was used at the Fortunes Rocks fire. National Guardsmen at the fires in Kennebunk. Fire in Kennebunk. Fire along Pool Road in Biddeford. National Guardsmen alongside up in Lyman. Firefighters relaxing after the fire was out. Seen along a burnt road up in Waterboro. More National Guardsmen. After the fire was out, firefighters all over York County asked for better equipment. This is located in Kennebunkport, the old Atlantic steamer that was located in the village fire station, asking for fire equipment donations. So what did all of this mean in terms of natural phenomena and human experience? How did much of the detail of incredible stories that were told in the newspapers that week, can we believe how much of this was fact and how much was myth? Joyce Butler found in her research that myth can always attach to historical events, particularly those that rely on newspaper and second-hand accounts. But here are some of the things that she discovered through her research that are facts about the 1947 forest fires in the state of Maine. The 150 fires that burned that week swept more than 200,000 acres, mostly in the southern part of the state, not in the uninhabited northern forests. 17 communities suffered significant losses. 9 of them were practically wiped out. Scores of other homes and buildings were lost. Amazingly, only 15 people died, mostly to traffic accidents, to heart attacks, a few to smoke inhalation, but no firefighters were injured. Millions of trees were damaged and needed to be salvaged before spring brought insects to destroy whatever good wood was left. 3 million feet of cut lumber stacked in mill yards and ready for sale was burnt. The estimated overall valuation of the loss of the fire was $30 million. 3,500 people had been displaced by the fire. 2,500 were made homeless. The water tables were altered, changing well situations for thousands. White pine was more or less swept from southern Maine and has not really been developed since. Wildlife was killed. Trout died in overheated streams. Although a survey done by the Maine Warden Service after the fire found sufficient breeding stock of birds, etc., that did remain, although somewhat injured. Livestock that was turned loose did survive the fire, but those who had been left shut into barns, including well-loved horses, did die. Pets of dogs, cats, and other small pets all were lost. Household goods, antiques, food supplies that had been put up for the winter for both man and beast, family and municipal records, tools and equipment needed for making a living, all these were lost in staggering numbers. But people mostly said that it was a miracle that more was not lost. What was the effect that this catastrophe had on people? Every human reaction you could name resulted during the fires and for years afterwards. In the interviews that Joyce gave with people that told them about their fire experiences, and those that I have done with people that were children during 1947 between the ages of 17 and the ages of 9 or 10, all have distinct memories of the fire and speak of many of these same characters. Fear. More than one thought that it was the end of their world as they knew it. Grief. 30 years after her family's ordeal in the Waterboroughs, Bessie Ricker still wept while she told Joyce about it. Nostalgia for what was lost. Loved homes. A loved summer place. The change in communities, particularly for the loss of beautiful old trees, including elm trees, which would unfortunately later be lost to Dutch elm disease. Woodlots, where it had been the tradition to cut the annual Christmas tree every year. Even for the way of life that may not be the same after the fire. Determination to begin again. Esther Boynton and her husband lost their home and everything in it in the Brownfield fire. After, when they were trying to begin again, her husband finally broke down and cried, overwhelmed by the loss, the mess, the need to go on with nothing to go on with. I don't know where to turn, he said. But spunky Esther said, I don't know either, but we've got to do something. We've still got running water from the spring, and we still have our driveway. They did rebuild up in Brownfield. Philosophy. One 16-year-old said fighting the massive flames taught him how to deal with overwhelming problems later in life. You just deal with what's right in front of you. You do not worry about the larger problem. Courage. Yes, in spades. With fire that was flying over their heads, with not knowing exactly which way the fire or the wind would bring it, their courage was in force. Charity and neighborliness. National Red Cross officials were amazed at how little that they had to offer was used. Friends and even communities helped the less fortunate. People said that the 47th fire was a family affair. In those days, everyone knew everyone, unlike in today's world where there are so many that we do not know amongst our neighbors. Joy. One group of firefighters from Sanford spent their time working in the woods, digging out the fire. By singing in harmony, they enjoyed it so much that they kept singing for years after it was over and called themselves the Merry Men. So, here are some other facts about the 1947 fire. Did uncontrolled fires travel 8 to 10 miles in 20 minutes? Yes. Did an advancing wildfire sound like a freight train coming? Yes. Were the advancing fronts miles long? Yes. Did the fires jump highways and even rivers? They certainly did. Did firefighters watch fire travel through midair over brooks as if expelled by a blowtorch? Yes. It is also true that fires burned into the ground, right to the mineral soil, consuming even the dry earth. It also traveled underground in the root system of trees, breaking out anew on the surface beyond fire lines that had been set up to stop it. Ground fires crowned, that is, swept up to the top of trees, the flames rolling like a great ball from tree to tree. Smoke from the fires rose thousands of feet into the air, and the crew of at least one ship, over 600 miles at sea, smelled the smoke from the Maine fires. The moon shone blood red behind the smoke, and the night sky stayed orange, scaring children. Houses in the path of advancing fires exploded even before flames reached them. And, unexplained to only but God, houses, even piles of dried hay stacked in yards, survived when all around them was destroyed. Did homeowners who stayed with their property save it by beating out flames with brooms or laying wet blankets around foundations? They did. Was there a pile of donated brooms as high as any room in Portland or Biddeford? Yes, there was. Did homeowners use anything wet they could find after their water systems had been drained to douse small fires and save their houses? Ketchup, vinegar, milk, water from the toilet bowl, and barrels of cider? Yes, they did. Was property moved to places judged safe only to burn while their places of origin did not? Yes. Did faithful dogs who refused to leave their lifelong homes with their owners and go into burning barns where they took refuge? Yes, they did. Winter supplies of coal continued to burn in the cellar of houses destroyed by wildfires long after the actual fires were put out. Firefighters took refuge from advancing flames in a steel culvert, sharing it with a skunk, a porcupine, and a rabbit. Water was hauled to fires burning deep in the woods, in milk trucks, in any kind of container that could be found, even in a new septic tank that was sitting in someone's yard, waiting to be installed. Could this fire happen again? Yes, it could. Why is it important that we should remember? Because we still need to be conscientious about fire in dry seasons. Past 2 summers have been very dry, and it has been on firefighters' minds about watching out for the dryness of the woods and of the areas next to highways, etc. We see it in California and places out west where fire becomes uncontrolled very quickly. Granted, we are in a much wetter part of the country here, and huge changes have taken in firefighter techniques. While the Indian tanks that you saw on the backs of people for carrying water and other simple tools are still used by our volunteer and professional firemen and women, there are still many improvements that were not in force in 1947. Our firefighters are superbly trained. They continue to go through training exercises and take courses to be certified in firefighter techniques and continue that training on a regular basis. We now have regional and even international, with our Canadian provinces that are around us, coordination of firefighters that have been established. Hose cumping on fire hoses have been completely standardized. That was not in place in 1947. Lines of leadership have been designated. Their communication equipment is far superior, and it could not have even been dreamt of in 1947. It is no longer necessary for firefighters to depend upon pilots that were flying over the burns to write notes on slips of paper, to weight them down with rocks and drop them to crews below, to warn them when the fire had shifted and it was coming directly towards them or someone else. With all of this, however, a firefighter named Lloyd Davis of Alfred told Joyce when she was writing her book, "You take any time nature goes on a rampage. I don't care whether it's a flood, an earthquake, fire, a cyclone, or a tornado. Until nature decides that it wants to quiet it down a mite, human effort is almost useless." We only know, watching the news in this day and age, in 2017 and 18, that this is quite true. So we should remember the 1947 fire. It's important to tell future generations and to remind ourselves that this did happen and was and is still considered the worst natural disaster in the state of Maine's history. If you have not read Joyce Butler's Wildfire Loose, The Week Maine Burned, I encourage you to do so. It is still being printed by Down East Books and is available through their website and is also available here at the Brickstore Museum at 117 Main Street in Kennebunk, Maine. In closing, I want to thank the Brickstore Museum for the amount of research that they have. Joyce Butler has graciously donated all of her research materials that include her research on the 1947 fire into the Brickstore Museum in the Joyce Butler collection in our archives. Again, I wish to thank Joyce for her continuing support of the museum, as well as for her support with helping